In this step, we're going to be talking about how to connect your components to data. So basically how to declare what data your components need and what the framework does to help with that. So let's start by taking a look at the Redux data flow. So again, Lore is built on top of Redux, so this is the flow that happens underneath every time you need data. So let's say you have a component and it needs some data. So that component is going to invoke an action creator, which is going to make a request to the server, and the server will return some response. That response gets mapped into an action, which is then dispatched to the reducers. The reducers compose that into a new application state. They notify the application or your component, and then that component re-renders with the new data. And so there's actually quite a bit that goes on underneath. But from a component perspective, the concept is really simple in that components just say, hey, I want some data, and there's a store in the application that should provide that data if it exists. And the idea is that if the data doesn't exist in the store, then something should happen, and that data should be fetched and put in the store, right? So it's this notion of give me data if we have it and go get it if we don't. So to illustrate what Lore does to help with that, we're going to take a look at a couple components. And so we have a typical ES5 component on the left and an ESNext style component on the right. And to declare what data these components need, they both declare that they need posts. There's a higher order component called connect that you can wrap these in. And this higher order component exists to allow you to declare what data they need, and that data will be passed down to the component. To illustrate how this works, let's take a look at the ESNext style decorator, as it's a little easier to look at. And we're going to make it a little more complex. So we're going to compose a statement here that basically says, I want all the posts where the author ID is 1, 2, 3. And when you do that, this component, this higher order component, you're really creating this question that says, have these posts already been fetched, right? So this is what's happening underneath. And so this higher order component is going to go look in the Redux store, and it's going to see if this query has already been fulfilled. Have we fetched the posts by this author? If we have, then these posts will be passed down into the component. And if this question has not been asked yet, if the data has not been fetched from the server, then Lore will automatically call the action creator responsible for retrieving that data. So it's going to automatically invoke lore.actions.post.find with the parameters that you passed in. This will cause a network request to go out to retrieve the posts by that author. And when the data comes back, the component will re-render because the data now exists in the store. In the next render cycle that occurs, the data will exist, and so the component will have it and will be able to use it. So when you need to interact with an endpoint in Lore, the standard flow is to add a model, which will start off empty, and then wrap your component in the connect decorator and declare what piece of state you need, and the data will automatically be passed to your component. And so the takeaway here is that conventions can be pretty awesome. With some sensible defaults and the right abstraction layers, they can enable a small amount of code to become an enormous amount of functionality. So let's flip over to our code to see this in action. In this step, we want to replace our mock data here in our feed with the actual tweets from our API. So to do that, go into your code and you're going to open up the source directory, go into components, and we're looking at the feed. And so the feed is the component that's declaring that it needs tweets. And so we're going to use the higher order connect component in order to supply those tweets. So let's start by taking a look at the syntax. So when you want to use it, you call lore.connect and you pass in a function. And this function takes 2 arguments. So getState is the method that you're going to use to describe what piece of data you need, and props is what is passed down from the parent components. So once you describe what you need, then this method itself also needs to be invoked, and you pass in the component that you want connected. So this is standard syntax for higher order components. All right, so I'm going to comment that out, and we're going to use it. So this component here is our component that we've already got in this file. And so we just need to wrap it with this connect method. So I'm going to start by saying lore.connect and give it a function. takes get state and props. And then I'm going to move our component down to a new line. And so now I just need to enclose our component in the parentheses. And that removes any syntax errors. So now I'm going to use this get state method. So I need to return the data that I want. So this component says that it's expecting tweets, that's required. So we're going to match that name. So I'm going to say that we want to connect and we want to provide something called tweets to this component. And I want to get state, and the piece of state I'm interested in is tweet.find. And so this syntax says I just want to find the tweets. So we don't have any arguments. We're not having anything more granular. We're not looking for tweets by a specific person. We just want to get the first page of tweets. And so this syntax is all we need to set up that server flow to fetch data and provide it to the component. So let's save that. And we're going to flip over to the browser. We're going to refresh to make sure it's loaded. And I'm going to open up the DevTools, and we're going to refresh the page. All right, and right here we can see that there was an error. So there was in fact a GET request that went out to fetch our tweets, but we have this error right here that says expected models to be an array, but got this data. Did you forget to override parse to extract the models? And what this means is that the data that comes back from the server isn't an array that we can use. It has this data structure where the information we want is stored in data, and then there's this metadata property. And so the framework is basically complaining and saying, I don't know what the structure of this data is, so I don't know where the array of tweets is that you want me to provide to the store. So this confirms that our component is in fact declaring the data it needs, and that is in fact sending a network request out to retrieve it. So in the next step, we're going to solve this error, and we're going to dig in and understand exactly what it means and how to fix it so that we can actually display our feed.